Let's start without any ado. I'm very happy to have you all here, and I'm going to spend probably the first half an hour or something going over this path to the Constitution, American politics. And then in the second half, I will discuss the legacy of ancient Greece. Okay? And although we have only 60 minutes, I would encourage questions and comments wherever applicable. I may have to be kind of brief with my answers, but I would encourage your questions. Okay? So if you don't understand what I'm saying, if you didn't hear what I said, please raise your hand and I will gladly explain. Okay, so first of all, the path to the American Constitution. And I would like to follow this course, this plan. First, I'll discuss the historical background that led up to the Constitution. And then I will briefly discuss what the product of the process was. You know, the American Constitution as we have it today, which is over 220 years old. And then I will briefly explain to you the course structure. In other words, the 10-week course is starting next month. So I will briefly explain how it's structured. Okay, so it all started, the origins. People in England back in the early 17th century, they were suffering under a certain authoritarian regime, particularly under James I. James I and Charles I of the Stuart dynasty. Okay? They were very autocratic. Autocratic means sensitivity. And people suffered under these rulers for a number of reasons. And they left England in search of a better land, better environment. So they left looking for the promised land. And what were they looking for? First of all, they were looking for religious freedom, because the Stuart dynasty and the church, the Anglican church, were oppressive. They did not show enough understanding and tolerance towards the spirit of Protestantism, spirit of Reformation, 宗教改革. So these people who are more liberal-minded religiously, they left England in search of a better land where they could have religious freedom. And secondly, they were looking for political liberty. These people were very oppressive, politically speaking, particularly towards the religious minority. And thirdly, of course, you know, these immigrants who became colonists. Americaに来た移住民となった人たち. We call them usually the colonists. They were looking for economic prosperity and opportunity. To, you know, that's one of the main universal motivations, universal motives of immigrants to any country. They were looking for an economic opportunity to make more money. Okay? So these were the three primary motives. But if you put them in a different way, okay, it becomes like this. In political terms, 政治的な表現をすれば, they boil down to four main core values, core beliefs and values, which became the foundation stone of American politics, American political culture. One was the idea of liberty, particularly the freedom to express one's opinion, freedom to exercise one's religion and philosophy and lifestyle. And secondly, the idea of equality. Now we're talking about equality of opportunity, not equality of the end result, consequence. Rather, everybody should be given an equal opportunity to succeed. Okay? That kind of sense of equality. And thirdly, the concept of individualism. That each person should be allowed to pursue his or her lifestyle, religion, and way of life, and so on and so forth. So, idea of self-determination. 自分で自分のことを決めて you take your own initiative to form your own life. And fourth, unlike what they had to suffer under those and other rulers, they wanted to have democracy, where they will be in charge of their own destiny, politically, by having a kind of political system where law is going to be the rule, and not the whims. Whims っていうのは気まぐれね。Not the whims of those dictators. Dictators. 独裁者. So they came to America looking for religious freedom, political liberty, and economic prosperity. But in political terms, they were really looking for these four main ideas. And they became the core beliefs of the American political culture. Liberty, equality, individualism, and democracy, where the rule of law is the standard. Okay? And as you must have learned in world history, those colonists, otherwise known as settlers, 移住民たち, okay? They eventually started an armed conflict, war with the mother country, England. And in 1775, the mounting conflict resulted in armed conflict. Okay? That's when the war began, with a military clash in the outskirts of Boston. So what happened was, the following year, okay, 1776, July 4th, Independence Day. That's when the Declaration of Independence was drafted and made public. This Declaration of Independence, 独立宣言, was drafted by Thomas Jefferson. It looked like this. And in this declaration, the founding fathers, we call them founding fathers, 独立の父たち. Okay? The founding fathers asserted people's rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Each person has the right to pursue these three things. And that's what America is all about. And as part of this Declaration of Independence, it confirmed the idea of social contract, 社会契約. And this social contract means that government and the citizens, they have a mutual contract whereby the government, its role is to protect people's right to these three things. And in return, as long as the government fulfills its obligation, people have a duty, obligation to obey the government. So what that implies is if the government does not perform its function of protecting these three things, then the people will not be obligated to obey and listen to the government. So it's like the idea of contract. There was such a social contract. Okay? And this Declaration of Independence clearly states that those colonists and settlers were founding a new nation based on this idea of social contract. That their obedience to government was not unconditional. It was conditional and contractual. Okay? And another important notion that is expressed in this declaration is the idea of popular sovereignty, which means 人民主権. Sovereignty means 主権. Okay? The people are the real rulers. Okay? They are the real most important people. And the government is just an expression or a tool to realize people's will and preference. Okay? So that became the Declaration of Independence. And so what happened afterwards, this was 1776. 7 years later, 1783, they finally, England and those American colonists, they signed a treaty, the Treaty of Paris, Paris条約. Okay? And in this treaty, America won formal recognition as an independent state. But not only that, America also, those colonists, won a vast area from the Atlantic coast to the Mississippi River, which I'll draw you a map. America is like this. This is Canada, okay? And this is the Mississippi River, okay? So they won the vast territory from the Atlantic coast here to the Mississippi River, and from Canada all the way to Florida. So basically they won this whole area. So that was a great gain. Okay? Originally there were only 13 states. What followed the Treaty of Paris was 4 years later, okay? 4 years later, they gathered in Philadelphia, and they had this Philadelphia Convention, which was also called the Constitutional Convention, 憲法制定議会. Okay? At this convention, 55 delegates, 代表者たち, from all the 13 states gathered in Philadelphia, and they discussed and debated how to revise the Constitution. In other words, in 1781, they made the first Constitution, which was quite imperfect. So this first Constitution was valid until 1789 for 8 years. But because it was imperfect, they wanted to revise it to have a better, more binding kind of constitution, more effective constitution. So these people, founding fathers, they were men of status. In other words, they were not women, they were men. And they were wealthy people, educated people. Okay? These 55 people. And you see some familiar faces. Who is this? Anybody? Looks familiar to you? Washington. George Washington. Okay. whoever can guess who this is, you can have this pen. 誰でも当たったらあげる。大丈夫。
ウィリアム。
こうだった。これは実は、this is Alexander Hamilton. Okay? And, okay, my offer still stands. もう一回やっていいよ。これは James Madison. Okay? This was Hamilton. And this guy was Madison, James Madison. And James Madison, by the way, he was very short, he was small, but he was very big in his ideas. And that's how he ended up drafting most of the Constitution. So he's called the father of the Constitution. アメリカ憲法の父と呼ばれています。ね、背が低いからって気がむ必要ないんですよ。Okay, so at this Constitution, at this convention, they based the new constitution on 4 concepts. First one was the idea of social contract, the social contract theory, 社会契約論. The idea that government and the citizens have a mutual obligation. The government must protect people's right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And in exchange, people will obey the law and obey the government. Okay? Social contract. And secondly, by the way, underpinning means support, a supporting notion, supporting idea. Okay? The second underpinning was the idea of representation, that people will be electing their representatives to do the politics, to form the government. Okay? In other words, people will not be governing themselves, rather they will govern through representatives. 代表選挙へ通して選んだ人たちを通して登場する idea of representation. And thirdly, the separation of powers, 権力分立. In other words, since those people came from England, where the king had absolute power because of the concentration of power in his hands, they wanted to make sure that no big power is concentrated in one institution. So they wanted to separate powers between 3 entities. Okay? These 3 executive, meaning 執行部, president, legislature, 立法部, okay? Congress, and judiciary. Judiciary means 司法. Okay? So the power is split between those 3 institutions. So これ institutions というのはこれ機関っていう意味だけど、まあこういった政治的な機関。Right? By splitting power in 3, those founding fathers wanted to make sure that at no given time, no one institution would be so powerful that it could overwhelm the other institutions and oppress the people. Okay? And the fourth underpinning was the idea of federalism, 連邦主義. In other words, again, this is the extension of this idea of the separation of powers. Over here, we saw, right, the split of power split of federal government in 3 institutions. But this federalism means that power is split between the federal government, 中央政府, and state governments. Okay? So, the combination of federal central power and state power, okay? That's another idea to split, make sure that neither the federal government nor the state governments will be powerful enough to overwhelm the other. Okay? And that's how the Constitution was finally made. This was drafted at the convention, 1787. Okay, and in the next year, 1788, it was ratified. 批准された ratified. And in 1789, that's when the new constitution went into effect. 有効になりました。And that's when America formed the first new government with George Washington as the first president, 1789. So what does the Constitution look like? Well, it's very simple. It has 7 articles. 7つの条項があります。7条からなっています。The first article defines what legislature is, what its function is, and how congressmen are elected, and what their function, what their responsibilities are, and so on and so forth. Article 2, 第2条項は it defines the role of the executive, and how long the term is, and what the functions are. The third article defines the role of the judiciary. Okay? Besides the Supreme Court, there are other federal courts. So it defines the role of the judiciary and how the judges and justices are chosen and appointed. And Article 4 talks about interstate relations. In other words, interstate means between states. Okay? So suppose I'm from New York, okay? And suppose you are the state of Alabama. Okay? So I go to Alabama and I buy a gun. And I go to Georgia and shoot someone. So okay, I'm from New York, but I bought the gun in Alabama, but I shot somebody in Georgia. So where will I get tried? どこで裁判を受けるか? That kind of stuff. Or, interstate commerce. Suppose Alabama and Georgia want to do some trade. Okay? So there are some practical needs for regulating those interstate relationships. Okay? For different activities that took place between the states. Article 5 talked about the amendment process. In other words, the Constitution was going to be made, but what kind of procedures did they need to take in order to amend, 憲法修正する, in order to amend the Constitution? So Article 5 is all about the amendment process. And Article 6 talks about 3 main things. Debts. In other words, as I said, before this new constitution came into being, they had an older constitution for 8 years. Okay? And America incurred っていうのはこれはあれだよ。incur っていうのは負うってことね。つまり借金とかを負うとかそんな意味。So during those 8 years, America incurred debt Okay? So what would happen to the debt after America is reborn under a new constitution? Debts. And supremacy means, you would say, that means that if any state law or federal law disagrees or goes against the constitution, then that law must be corrected because the constitutionが一番偉い. This is the highest authority. So if any state or any federal government wants to pass a law that goes against these, the spirit and letters of the Constitution, that law is not valid. Okay? And oath means, oath ってのはこれなんていうのあれだよ。なんていうんだろう。そう、先生。ね。僕も先生だけど違う。これみんなあれ入ってた。あなたの今のも入ってたよ。Okay. 先生。つまり、that means that if I want to be elected to a government office, okay, I should not have to take any religious test. つまり、自分が何か宗教を信じているか信じてないとかそういうことは示さなくていい。つまり自分の宗教に関わらず regardless of your religion, you could be elected to government office. That was about oath. Okay? And Article 7 discussed ratification, the ratification process. 憲法を批准するっていうのはどういったプロセスを取るか。Okay? However, so this was how the Constitution was made. And then, 2 years later, the first 10 amendments were added to the Constitution. So 2 years later would be 1791. Okay? And they wanted to add 10 amendments to appease. Appease っていうのはこれなだめるっていうね。To appease the anti-federalists. Anti-federalists were people who were opposed to this new constitution because they were afraid that by making the federal government, by giving power to the federal government, it might oppress individual rights. Okay? So there were people who were afraid of having a central government. They wanted to have 地方分権地。They wanted to have an extreme form of decentralized nation. Okay? So, in order to appease those people, they made those 10 amendments. And they came to be called the Bill of Rights, 権利の章典. And those 10 amendments promised and guaranteed the protection of individual rights, such as the right to free speech, the right to the press. Okay, the press means マスコミの自由. And the right to assembly. Assembly っていうのは集会ね。集まっていろいろ会合していると。And the freedom of religion and other kinds of individual freedoms and rights. So by adding those 10 amendments to the Constitution, they wanted to make everybody happy because there was a large group of anti-federalists at that time. Right? So if I may summarize the whole thing, it becomes like this. There were 4 pillars of the Constitution. The idea of the separation of powers, federalism, social contract, and the idea of representation. But these 4 ideas were really inspired by the original aspirations of the people, the 4 core values. The idea of people's belief in liberty, equality, individualism, and democracy. Okay? And so these 4 core values inspired those 4 ideas. And what's unique about the US Constitution is that, it's relatively simple, only 7 articles. But those 7 articles are not so detailed. ちょっとぼかしてあんまり詳しいこと書いてない。So there is a lot of ambiguity. 曖昧さがある。And because it's not so detailed, and because there's so much ambiguity, it makes the Constitution more adaptable. あんまり詳細にわたって述べてあると柔軟性に欠けるんだよね。だから by giving a lot of ambiguity to the Constitution, the founding fathers wanted to make sure that the Constitution would be adaptable, 適応力がある and durable. Durability means the ability to last, okay? Ability to stand the test of time. So that's why the Constitution, which went into effect in 1789, is still the same Constitution today, with just up until today there are 27 amendments. Okay, 27 means the first 10 amendments plus 17 amendments. So there are 27 amendments, but it's still the same form, basically. And that durability is thanks to the adaptability, which is made possible by the ambiguity of the Constitution. Okay? So that's basically what I wanted to tell you in terms of the Constitution. And there are 4 main burning issues. Burning means 燃えている、つまりもう今迫った。Okay? 4 burning issues confronting America today. What to do with Syria, whether to join the war, or whether to declare war by attacking the biological weapons that Syria has, and what to do with immigrants. Immigrants are coming into the United States. A lot of them are illegal immigrants who overstay or who enter the country illegally or overstay their visas. Okay? And the debt ceiling. In other words, that debt ceiling means limitation. So this is about how much the federal government can borrow in order to do public spending. Okay? 公共事業とかをやるためにどれぐらい政府が借金をすることができるか。And Obamacare, that's the new health law that Obama got the Congress to pass. And there is a lot of opposition from the Republicans as well as from some states, because Obamacare basically gives more power to the federal government to force healthcare, healthcare policy on the citizens. So a lot of states don't like the idea of having this law imposed on them. They think that this Obamacare is an infringement of the state rights. Infringement is 侵害. Okay. Let me tell you a little bit about this course. The textbook is called American Politics in Society. It's written by David McKay. He's a British political scientist, and this was just updated a few months ago. Okay, our friend Satomi Kano found this on the Amazon. And it's a standard college textbook used to teach American politics. And it's comprehensively coverage. It has a comparative perspective because the author is British. So he constantly compares the American political situation and political system to the European situation and European political systems. Okay? And he puts the discussion in a broader historical context. It's very up to date, and it comes with glossary, okay? 重要単語の説明, notes, references, websites, and index. So it's a very good textbook. It's available on the Amazon, and the course is given every Saturday. Okay, 10:30 to 12, 90 minutes for a total of 10 sessions. And I'm going to skip the following 4 slides. Okay, so, well, I'll just briefly go like this. This term, which is ending soon, we've been doing chapters 2, 3, 6. Okay? But it turns out that we are spending a lot of time on the Constitution, so we may get to finish up to chapter 4. We may start with chapter 5, but if you decide to take this course, I'll email you and let you know exactly where we're starting in October. Okay? The class will go like today's lecture. Okay? I will give you like a reading assignment. I will tell you a week before which chapter and what pages we'll be covering the following week. And I'll give you a lecture handout, like today, I'll give you a handout. And if you want, it's optional. You can do a presentation of part of the chapter that you will be interested in. You want to do a presentation? It's a good exercise to give a presentation in English. Okay? And but each series stands on its own. それぞれシリーズ1学期ごとにありますが、それで一つで独立して取れますので、大丈夫です。The first series, well, actually it's the second series. Okay? It'll kick off October 12th. But the deadline for application is next Thursday. Right? So please apply by next Thursday. You'll make me very happy, and you'll be able to learn something. You know, it's going to be a great, exciting 10 weeks. Okay, so that's about American politics. Any questions? Okay, let's move on to philosophy. Now, we're a little bit behind time, so I'm gonna quickly go through these points. I'll first tell you about the ancient mythological world picture. 神話的なものの見方、考え方。Okay? And then I'll tell you how people separated from that kind of worldview. And we're talking about the paradigm shift that took place. Paradigm shift. And then we'll discuss some of the major ancient Greek philosophers. The natural philosophers, then Socrates, Plato, Platon, and Aristotle. Okay? And then I'll give you a little overview of the history of philosophy. And then I'll tell you about this class, which starts equally, likewise, next month. So, the mythological world picture is these are all 4 seasons. 秋、冬、春、夏。春、夏。ちょっとわかんない。これは春、夏、秋、冬だな。So, in the ancient world, when people faced something that they did not understand, well, it's not just the ancient world. it's even today. When people don't understand something, they have an urge. 強い欲望. They have an urge to find an explanation. And in the attempt to explain the processes of nature, okay, people didn't understand why winter turns to spring, and spring turns to summer, and summer turns to autumn. People didn't understand what causes changes in nature. So, in order to explain, they resorted to religious explanations. What do I mean by religious explanations? What I mean is they looked for explanations for natural processes in terms of anthropomorphic gods. Gods, 神々. Anthropomorphic means 人間的な、人間の顔とか性格をした。Anthropomorphic gods. And also by introducing the forces of good and evil. 何か善の力、悪の力が働いているから雨が降るんだ、雷が来るんだ、地震が来るんだ。Okay? So, natural phenomena were explained in terms of these gods and good and evil's activities. You know, when two gods were fighting, that would result in thunder and rain and storms. Whereas when the gods were in, you know, very happy and in a good mood, it will be a sunny day and a nice breeze will blow and so on and so forth. So that was, in short, the mythological world picture. That people tried to explain something they couldn't understand by introducing gods, by turning to religion. Okay? And then the paradigm shift happened around 600 years BC in Greece. Have you ever been to Greece? Any of you? You have been to Greece. Did you see this? Yeah. So maybe you're still here. That's right, huh? So, what was the paradigm shift specifically? Well, as I said, it was a shift from mythology to philosophy. Okay? What I mean by that is those philosophers broke away from the mythological way of thinking to a new way of thinking based on reason, 理性, and experience. 経験と理性に基づいたものの見方をするようになる。Okay? Those philosophers scrutinized. Scrutinize means 吟味する。Scrutinized. Okay? They scrutinized mythology and found it inadequate. これじゃ不十分だ。And they were particularly troubled by the inconsistencies. 一貫性のなさ。Inconsistencies in the traditional way of looking at things. And they went on to challenge the mythological point of view and to reject this kind of way of explaining the natural processes. So what they did, they looked for more plausible explanations. Plausible means もっとまともな more rational explanations. And that's how they started looking for coherent systems of beliefs based on rational inquiry. Inquiry means searching, 探求, and experience. Coherent means internally consistent, 整合性のある。That was the main motive, main interest of the philosophers. And these people, the first ones were called the natural philosophers, 自然哲学者たち。Why were they called the natural philosophers? Because they were mainly concerned to explain the natural world and its processes. And they were principally interested in two things, two predominant projects. Predominant means 圧倒的に重要な。First one was, what is the basic constituent substance? つまり万物の根源っていうのは何であるか。Basic constituent substance というのは実体というかそんな意味ね。一番小さな素粒子みたいなのは何であるか。Of all things in nature. And secondly, what causes changes in nature? These were the two main interests of those philosophers. What's the smallest thing that constitutes, that makes up this world? Right? And probably you studied in high school or college that there was one natural philosopher called Democritus, and he theorized that the basic constituent substance was called atom. アトムっていうものが一番小さなもので、アトムっていうのはこれギリシャ語でこれ以上割ることもできないものってそんな意味なんです。Okay? And what causes changes in nature? Why do people die? Why do children grow bigger? Why does it rain? Why does it snow? Why is summer replaced by autumn? And so on and so forth. Okay? So these natural philosophers, what was interesting is that the ancient Greeks, they used to believe that even world history was controlled and determined by fate, 運命, and 宿命, and the gods. Okay? But along with the natural philosophers, there were new scholars, historians. The first historians emerged, and they searched for natural explanations for the course of history. And we have those two historians that you might have heard of. Herodotus. He wrote the histories. This was an account of the Persian War that Greece fought with Persia. ペルシャ戦争の戦争史ね。戦史。And Thucydides. 築地です。こういう人は築地に住んでる人でちゃんと聞いてるから大切にしてる。Thucydides. これはafter the Persian War, Athens and Sparta. アテネとスパルタが仲違いしたわけね。ギリシャ世界の中で。And this was an account of the war. So these two books, instead of explaining the course of history by introducing the gods and fate, they tried to explain in more earthly. Earthly っていうのはこの世的な。And mundane. Mundane っていうのは世俗的な。Okay? They tried to explain the course of history through mundane and earthly terms. So these first historians were sort of like the equivalents of the natural philosophers. And in the field of medicine, 医学の分野でも同じようなことが起きました。The Greeks before, they used to believe that sickness and health were caused by some supernatural reasons, such as the gods. Okay? If you fall sick, it's because the gods were punishing you for doing some bad things. But along with the natural philosophers and the new historians, there was a new way of looking at sickness and health. A Greek medical science emerged, and people who subscribed to this new way of looking at things, they tried to look for natural explanations for sickness and health. Okay? One main character in this school was Hippocrates. Okay? And then, after the natural philosophers came, this guy, Socrates. This was, Socrates had to die by drinking hemlock. 毒薬を飲む直前ね。これボディービルディングに行った後とかって。Okay. So, unlike the natural philosophers, Socrates, Plato was the disciple of Socrates, okay? And Aristotle was the disciple of Plato. だから亀が亀の子、亀の子の亀の子、これ3世代なんだ。トラさんみたいでした話が。今トラさんの映画見ててさ、出てきちゃう。それで、unlike the natural philosophers, they all lived outside of Athens. But those three philosophers lived in Athens. And Athens, by this time, was the cultural center of the ancient Greek world. So their philosophical project was the individual and the individual's place in society. As you may recall, the natural philosophers were interested in two things: the basic constituent substance and change. What causes change? But here, those three philosophers were principally interested in the person, human being, and society, human society. So their interest shifted. Okay? And Socrates said that philosophy is what everybody needs. Okay? Because it interests and concerns all of us. 全ての人が学ぶ必要がある。And to question our knowledge, to question the source of our knowledge, and to question how we should live, is so important that if we do not engage in philosophy, we're not really living. Are you living?
I hope so.
Yeah, okay. So Socrates will be proud of you, right? Socrates declared at his own trial in 399, after he came back from the weightlifting, right? He said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Unexamined means 考慮することのない、振り返ることのない人生っていうのは生きとる価値がないんだっちゃ。That's what he said. He had a little Tohoku accent dialect. Right? And his disciple Plato, the central idea of Plato was the theory of forms, イデア論。これ高校とかの倫理学これ倫理社会で習わなかった。イデア論。The theory of forms basically says that behind the material world of changes, behind our world that we can touch and see and smell, there is another reality, deeper reality. And this deeper reality is the world of ideas or forms. Okay? To give you a little illustration, it's like this. Besides this world, there is another world called the world of ideas. And in this ideakai in Japanese, there are like idea cookie. In other words, クッキーの原型ってものがここにあるんだ。Prototype. And there is also the idea horse. 馬っちものの原型がここにあるんだ。自転車、チャリンコの原型があるんだ。Okay? So these, it's because there are those prototypes. プロトタイプでも日本語になってんじゃないの？プロトタイプ。It's because there are those prototypes that in our world, the physical world, this is our world. Okay? Based on this cookie, we have actual physical cookies. Cookie 1, cookie 2, cookie 3. And likewise, based on this, modeled after this horse, idea horse, we have the actual physical horses that we see in this world. And likewise with the bicycle idea, we have actual bicycles based on this. So we used to think that this is all we have. Okay? Actual cookies, individual horses, and concrete physical bicycles. But here is saying that there is this other world in which all the prototypes of everything we see in this world exist. So in a way, Plato is doubling. He has a double vision. 何でも二重に見える人いるでしょ、ものが。僕もさ、二重に見えるから今ここに20人ぐらいいると思ったんだけど、本当は何人なんだろう。He had a double vision, okay? And he sort of like although, well, the way he explained it is, you cannot know this world by touching, but you can do philosophy and, you know, recollect, 想起する、思い出す, because we all used to be in this world, and we were born into this world. So all we need to do is to do philosophy and remember. That was for Plato's idea. Now, Aristotle, he believed in both reason and senses. In other words, not just, Plato said only reason. 頭を使ってイデア界を知るんだ。But Aristotle emphasized both reason and senses, 五感. And he was preoccupied with changes. What causes changes? And he held that actual only things that exist in this world, everywhere, all over, is the actual material forces. And we see, let's say, horse 1, horse 2, horse 3, we see actual horses, and we notice some commonalities, common features between all these horses. So based on those common features, we develop the idea of, we develop a certain definition of what a horse is. Okay? So Aristotle, he denied the theory of forms. All that existed for him was this world. Actual horses, actual cookies, actual bicycles. Okay? So those ideas of horses and cookies and bicycles that Plato talked about they don't have any independent existence. Okay? They are just definitions that we create afterwards. And the highest degree of existence in reality is what we perceive. 私たちが五感で知覚できるものしか存在しないんである。And so he criticized his own teaching. Okay? I sometimes make jokes about my sensei, Oi sensei. But he was worse. He criticized Plato. I just sometimes make jokes about him. So I'm much better than Aristotle. He was not ちょっとあれだよ。自分の先生に向かってね、真っ向から反対したわけ。Okay? So what happened after the Greek world was like this. There are four main periods in the history of philosophy. Ancient Greece, the Middle Ages. Middle Ages これは中年のことじゃないですよ。これは中世のね。Middle Ages. This stretched for 1,000 years. And then came the modern era, Kingdom. It was followed by the contemporary world that we live in today. And we sort of covered what happened here. And in the August, next term, we'll start looking at the Middle Ages. It was a long 1,000 years. And basically Christianity, church theology, was the predominant idea. And philosophy had to sort of like serve the church. Okay? And as we cover each period, you will see that each period has its own philosophers. Okay? And these philosophers, we will examine each philosophers and try to see what questions they asked and how they answered those questions and how their ideas were developed, applied, challenged, and denied or contradicted by later philosophers. So by doing a historical survey of philosophy, we can check each period and see what philosophers existed in each period and ask and answer those questions. Okay? So just finish up. The textbook that we're going to be using is Sophie no Sekai. It's very readable. これ哲学の本だけどすごく読みやすいです。中学生の女の子が主人公なんですね。Sophie Amundsen. And this book covers from ancient Greece to the contemporary world. And this class meets every Thursday evening for 10 sessions. Okay? And again, just like with the American politics class, it has, I'll give you a reading assignment. I'll tell you in advance how many pages we'll be covering next time. And I'll give you a lecture handout each time. And you're more than welcome to do a class presentation. Okay? And the second series, we're just finishing off the first series. So the second series kicks off October 10th. Okay? I'll be delighted to have you all. If you all sign up, that'll be great. Okay, so if you have a little questionnaire over there, アンケートあるでしょ。それにちょっと書いて、自分の名前は別に書かなくていいから。